Hey, this is Tony here. I'm going to show you today some processing tips and tricks for working on a Seestar S50 mosaic image. And I'm going to be using Siril and Photoshop today. And the object that we're working on is M42 The Orion Nebula. So with no further ado, let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is to open up the mosaic image, and this was captured a few nights ago in really below average scene conditions. There was many of the subframes were dropped by Seestar as it was capturing the frames. I was using about 20-second exposure lengths on the subs, and the total exposure time was only about 50 minutes, and it was made up of a series of tiles that were basically stitched together to make up a mosaic of M42. Right now, I'm in what's called linear view in Siril, so there's not really much to see. I'm going to go into auto stretch mode, and this sort of helps display what's inside the image, and it doesn't touch the file at all. I've not processed this file in any way. I'm just simply viewing it in an auto stretch mode. The first thing we should do is to go into Tools and Astrometry and Image Placeholder. I'm going to type in the name of the object and then Find, and then we're going to click OK. And what this helps Siril do is understand some of the capture parameters that were used to obtain this image. Things like the focal length of the telescope, the pixel size of the camera, and those kinds of things. So Siril uses that in later processing. The next thing we probably want to do is go ahead and work on some of this background. It seems like the background's a little bit uneven. It's not terrible, but we'll go ahead, and there's a tool in Siril under Scripts, Python Scripts, Processing, and it's called Auto BGE. I'm going to go ahead and run that, and you'll see a dialog will pop up in a few moments. And once it's done that, I'm going to click on Process. I'm just going to accept the defaults. Click on Process, and that will go ahead and do its magic. The processing is already complete. And yeah, there's a very subtle change in the background gradients on this image. More so, there's pretty bad noise on the edges of the frame, and that's just the way that the tiles have been stitched together, where some of the tiles may be in an lower exposure length than the others, but we're going to go ahead and we'll work on this noise as well. So the next thing we want to do after that is go ahead and do a color calibration. So we go to Image Processing, Color Calibration, and we're going to check the spectrophotometric color calibration and just accept the defaults. But before we do that, I'm going to call out that in this tool, you can select the Seestar sensor. And in this particular example, I did use the built-in light pollution filter in Seestar, so you can select that as well, because it does help with the color calibration. Click on OK, and that's gone ahead and completed. A very subtle change in the color calibration. I will say it's not a huge amount. The other thing that I do like to do is go into Image Processing and remove green noise. And so I'm going to click on Apply for that. And again, a very, very minor subtle change in the coloring. Okay. So a couple of observations here. I've mentioned the noise that's here on the kind of the edges of the image. But if I use my mouse wheel in Windows and wheel up, you'll see that some of the shapes of the stars are a little bit oblong. And again, below average scene conditions, probably what I should have done is made my subcaptures down to 10 seconds and not push the limits at 20 on the Seestar. I was EQ mounted, which I am always equatorially mounted for my Seestar, but still the seeing wasn't great. So we're going to go ahead and fix these star shapes as well. So let's go back to the full image view, which is this little box down here. Click. And we're going to go ahead and remove the stars before we start doing some processing. So I'm going to go to scripts, Python scripts, and then processing. And you'll notice there's a couple of maybe new tools or new to you for removing stars. I've typically used a tool called StarNet, and I haven't abandoned StarNet by any means. But I'm going to go ahead and use this fairly new tool from the team over at Cycon called called Starless. So I'm going to click on that one. I'm going to run the script, and it's going to bring up a dialog. So again, this is Cycon Starless tool, and you can see here the dialog has popped up. I'm going to go ahead and accept the defaults, and I'm just going to click on Process Image. And for my computer, which is a pretty powerful graphics processing unit, it performs the tasks pretty quickly. And so let's go ahead and minimize this box. Now you'll look at this and just go, wait a minute, looks pretty awful. There's all this weird background modeling and things look a bit blurry and whatnot. I want to remind you, I'm still in auto stretch mode in Siril. So you're not seeing a true representation of the condition of the FITS file right now. Again, I'm using auto stretch just as part of my processing workflow. So after I've done the Cycon Starless denoise, after I've done the Cycon Starless star removal, I'm getting my tools mixed up here. The next thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and I want to sharpen the nebula. So to do that, I'm going to go down to scripts, Python scripts, processing, and there's a series of tools here referred to as cosmic clarity. I'm going to click on that, run the script, and then it brings up its dialog. I'm going to select the sharpen tab, and where it says here for what do I want to sharpen, I'm going to click on this and say non-stellar only because I don't have any stars to sharpen. And I'm going to leave all these settings here just as default. I'm going to click on run. And I mentioned a few seconds ago, I do have a fairly powerful graphics processing unit. So this moves along at a fairly rapid clip. You see it's already completed. And if I zoom in with my mouse wheel and I click on undo up here, you'll see the subtle difference before and after sharpening. So it's done some nice magic there on the image. So let's go ahead and click on this little box down here to zoom back out to 100%. So we've done the star removal. We've done a sharpen of the nebula. And now we want to address some of this noise here that's in the background. To do that, I'm going to go to scripts, Python scripts, processing, and then here we have the Cycon Prism that I mentioned. Click on that, run the script, and it takes a few minutes to bring up its dialog box. And you can see here, Prism Denoise. This is the tool we're going to use. And I'm just going to accept the defaults here. So reset to defaults, and I'm going to click on process image. Let it do its magic. And you see I'm moving on a pretty rapid clip here, and we're done. And again, you look at this, go, okay, I'm not impressed. It still looks a little odd to me, but don't worry, I'm still in auto stretch mode. But if I kind of zoom in here, let's go down to this area here and go before and after. So definitely it's had an impact on the noise settings or noise amount in the image. Now, after I've done that, I now want to go ahead and start to process the contrast and brightness in this nebula. So now I'm going to go into linear mode. So this is kind of a true representation of what the FITS file currently looks like right now. I'm going to go into scripts, Python scripts, processing, and I'm going to select, Verilux, and I'm going to select hypermetric stretch here. So this is another great tool that the team over at Verilux has put together. I'm going to run the script, and I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to select here live preview. And so here you can kind of see what the image is looking like. So some of that background artifacts, if you will, has been reduced. I'm going to click on here. I'm running the default settings here, by the way. I'm going to click on Auto Calc. And then you can see here, as if I zoom in on my mouse wheel, what it's done is quite nicely is initially the core was quite blown out, or it looked like it was overexposed. But this tool has actually kind of brought it back into range for us quite nicely, actually. So let's click on Process and then close this. So now we're making some headway. The next thing I like to do is try and address some of this background here. And so I'm going to go into Image Processing and Stretches and Curves Transformation. There are other tools in Siril that can accomplish this, but this is a nice simple tool that I like to use. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down my left mouse button. I'm going to drag this cursor here just to where the start of the curve begins. And what I'm doing is I'm kind of essentially darkening the background levels in the image. You don't want to go too far. If I drag all the way over here, look, everything goes really dark. So let's go back to where we were, about here. And so we've got a fairly, at least to my eye, a fairly natural looking background. Click on Apply, Close. And so we're done with that processing step. The other thing you can try is, again, for the core, is go to Scripts, Python Scripts, and Processing. And there's a tool here called HDR Multiscale, High Dynamic Range Multiscale. I'm going to run that script. I'm just going to show you something that it can do. Not always successful to my eyes, but certainly check it out. So I'm going to click here, Fit to Preview. I'm going to use the mouse wheel to zoom in. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take down the number of scales down to 2. And I'm going to take the compression down to about 0.6. And let's click on Preview and see what it does. So actually, it's done a pretty nice job. So it's even taken down the burnt out core even more. And that looks pretty good to me. So actually, I'm going to go ahead, apply to Siril, click OK, and we're done. So now the core is looking even better, actually. So now let's see here. So we've gone through those steps, the multi-scale. One other thing you can try if you want to is to play around with some of the contrast. And there's another tool here in Scripts, Python Scripts, Verilux, and it's called Revela or Revealer. Run that script. And what it can do is, if I zoom in here just a little bit, if I move these just gently over, about 10% over, and the one below its structure, can you see what it's done to sort of the outer levels or the outer perimeters of the nebula? It seems to have kind of refined it a little bit better. So I'm going to kind of take that. Actually did a pretty good job here. If I hold down the space button before and after, so it is very subtle. So let's click on Process. And so now we've got that stage done. So the next thing we want to do is I'm going to save this as a FITS file. And we've done various things to it. We did a, let's see here. We did a sharpen. We did a HDR. We did a curves. We did a Verilux, Revela. So I'll just put a few names in there just so I remember which one it is. Then click on Save. Save it as a 32-bit FITS. And now let's go ahead and take a look at the star mask. So the star mask represents just the stars only layer. These are the stars that we removed using the Cyclone Starless. And again, if I zoom in with my mouse wheel, you can see some of the stars here are a little bit odd shaped. I'm going to go ahead and click on Auto Stretch here, but I will warn you, click, and you're going to see some artifacts here. Don't worry about the artifacts. We're going to solely focus on the stars here. So let's go ahead and in Image Processing, click on Star Processing, and then this little gear icon here. And there's some little magic that Siril can do for us here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set my roundness threshold to 1.0. That's because I don't feel like the stars are super elongated, and the lower the number for is basically for the less elongation. The profile type, I select Moffat because I seem to have had better luck with that. What we're doing now is this button here. We're now going to select the stars that we want to reshape. And we've told the dynamic PSF tool which ones we feel like are misshapen and need to be reshaped, essentially. So I'm now going to close this dialog, and I'm now going to click on full resynthesis. But let me zoom in a little bit before I do that, if I can. There we go. So let's go to image processing, star processing, and full resynthesis. And you see what it does now? We've got some really nice round stars. I'm still in auto stretch mode, so do bear that in mind. We now go to image processing, star processing, the gear icon, and then click this little delete button here just to remove the circles around the stars, and then close. Now I'm going to go into linear view again. So those stars are disappeared, and I'm going to do some stretching of the stars. So we're going to stretch image processing, stretches, and then we're going to do a transformation. The first one here is the asyn transformation that I like to use. The reason being is sometimes it helps retain the colors in the stars by doing this stretch. So let's move this along a little bit. And we've got some stars emerging now. Let's zoom in on these. We don't want to go too crazy because you see here, the stars are already starting to burn out in the cores. And so I would say I usually go around anything from like 50 to 200. Let's go to 200 just for this example. Click on apply. But now we want to bring out even more stars. So I go to image processing and stretches. And now I'm going to go to histogram transformation. This middle cursor here, I'm going to slide this along to about 15%. You can see now even more stars have appeared. Let's even go a bit more aggressive, just a few more stars. I'm going to use the mouse wheel to wheel up. And you can see we have got more stars. However, some of the stars look a bit sort of very, very coarse edges. So we want to kind of soften that a little bit. So I'm going to close this. Actually, go ahead and go back. Didn't take my stretch. So let's go back to here. Click on apply and then close. So that stretch is now taken. Now there's a little trick here in Siril to soften these stars. If you go down to the command line here and type in Gauss, and let's put in 2 for the setting. And I'm going to press enter and watch what happens to the stars. You can see they've definitely softened up a little bit. That number 2 is really up to you what you use. You can be more aggressive, less aggressive. So now what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and save this star mask. So let's call this one resynth, asyn, and we did a Gaussian blur. Save it as a 32-bit FITS file. And now what do we want to do? So now we'd like to recombine the star mask with the starless. So let's go ahead and do that. There's a tool here under image processing, again, star processing, and it's called star recomposition. And I like this tool just for its simplicity. And it brings up a dialog here. The first thing we're going to do is bring up the background. So this is basically the starless image that we worked on. So that's going to be, let's see here, that's going to be this one here. And then let's bring up the star mask, which is this one here. So now you can see that we've got these stars. They've started to appear. We can even, if we want to, we can actually bring up the brightness of these stars even a little bit more if we want to. We don't want to go too crazy because sometimes the image can look a little bit unnatural, at least to my eyes. But there you can see there. Let's back this up a bit because it looks a little bit strange to me. Around about there, I think is sufficient. Now, there is another tool that you can use as well, which is the Verilux Star Recombine, which would do a similar thing as well. I'm just going to show you just so you can see there's the different examples of tools. Click on apply, and then close. So now we've got a nicely recombined image. We've got some nice circular stars. We've still got that noise up there at that top left, and maybe even right here on the bottom. I mean, what I could do if I wanted to, I could just crop that out. But I'm going to show you a trick in Photoshop to kind of reduce some of that graininess. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to save this file as a TIFF file. Click on save, and I'm going to save it as a 16-bit TIFF because that's what Photoshop requires to work with. Let's move over to Photoshop, and let's go ahead and open up that image. There it is. And I'm going to click on in this layer here on the left. And by the way, you're not locked into using Photoshop. What I'm showing here, you can equally do in Affinity or GIMP or any other tools that you're using. So I'm going to click on Control-J to copy the layer. And then the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Select, Color Range, and I'm going to select the shadows. And there's a fuzziness setting and a range setting. And you can see what it's selected here. The white part represents I'm selecting the white part, basically. So if I move this slider here, you don't go too much because now it's digging into the nebula. And so you really want to make sure that you're not also selecting parts of the nebula as well. So let's leave it at around 22. Click on OK. And so that's what the background that's been selected, but still is kind of eaten into the nebula as well. So I'm going to select the lasso tool here in Photoshop, and I'm going to hold down in Windows my Alt button, and I'm going to drag an area around the nebula. And then I'm going to do Control-J. I'm now going to copy that background layer. And now I'm going to go into Filter, Camera Raw Filter, and I'm going to do a couple of things. Scroll down here, and you see where it says Detail here. I'm going to do a massive noise reduction, take out all the detail. Same for color noise reduction, take out all the detail, and click on OK. And look at that. You see that noisy edge part? The top and the bottom's kind of gone away. However, I may have overdone it a little bit. So you can mess around with the opacity setting for this layer. So there's a slider here. So let's go all the way to 0. So let's see the grain is now there. Let's just bump it up maybe to around 50%. That looks pretty reasonable to me. And then one last thing you can do in Photoshop is I'm going to go ahead and go do Control-Alt-Shift-E. Control-Alt-Shift-E. That copies the visible layer. And now I'm going to go into Filter and back to Camera Raw. And I'm going to play around with some settings around saturation and contrast. Now, if I bump up the saturation all the way, we've got this psychedelic Orion Nebula. I don't think you want that. So let's just back it off a little bit so it looks a bit more natural looking, at least to our eyes. And so maybe go to around 15% on that, or a setting of 15. There's also a vibrance setting here as well, which can be used to basically, as Photoshop describes, it changes saturation without color casts, basically. And I typically kind of bump this up just a little bit. If I go all the way, you can see again, it doesn't look very natural. So let's make this maybe around, let's keep it around 5. And then the other one I do is there's a clarity setting down here. And what clarity does is it kind of plays around with the contrast around the edges of objects. Now, if I go all the way up here and really bump it up, you can see you've certainly got well-defined nebula areas, but it doesn't necessarily, to my eyes, look quite natural. And again, it's just personal preference for a lot of these settings. So I'm going to dial this back. Let's take it back to about 10 and then click on OK. And so now we've got a fairly nice looking Orion Nebula. We've got nice round stars that have been resynthesized. We've got a core that's not burned out at all. And then the next thing you can do basically is you can just go into layers and you can flatten the image. And then I usually go into the crop tool here and have a 2:3 ratio of my image size and ratio, and click on enter. And there you have it. Now you can export that into a JPEG. There's one thing that I noticed the other day. If you look at the histogram up here on the top right, it seems like there's a bit of a color cast maybe. And again, some of this is personal preference, but if you want to address that in Photoshop, you can go to image and adjustments and basically color balance. And you can play around with this. In this case, if I raise the blue, that goes to blue. If I play around the green, yeah, maybe that kind of balances it just a little bit better. And again, a lot of this is personal preference. So let's just leave that like that. All right, everybody, thank you for your time. I hope you enjoyed the video. And I definitely encourage you to play around with Siril. There's different ways of doing things in Siril, and there's different ways of doing things in Photoshop. So definitely play around. And as I said, you're not locked into just using Photoshop. I happen to have a Photoshop subscription, but I've also used GIMP and Affinity as well. Thank you very much.